Mr. Simpson?
Thank you. I need to ask this question for Mr. Joyce. You mentioned, Mr. Cox, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative that's funded through the EPA. Relative to the other programs in your testimony, does the GLRI have much of an impact on your tribe, and are there tribal activities that the GLRI does fund that other BIA funding sources do not?
There are some. So some of the EPA dollars that come through GLRI do fund a little bit of our invasive species work currently.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Kilmer?
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks for being with us. Ray, good to see you. I want to just express gratitude for the fact that the tribe employs a ton of people in Mason County, and it's a great example of the interconnectedness between our tribal and non-tribal communities. I think the federal government needs to be a better partner, and particularly with regard to your ability to exercise your treaty rights. I was hoping that you could provide a little bit of additional detail about how the BIA's Shellfish Management Fund helps to support your tribe's effort to exercise your treaty rights.
Well, as co-managers, we do have, and being a self-governing tribe, we get to try to place those monies in the best use. But with the shellfish settlement, there were much more tribal title lands that we now manage, and we have access. As you know, in that settlement, it did allow us access to private lands and have 50% of the natural take of that. And so just with the current funding that we have in our compacts, we just have not had any increases to meet that increased demand. We live in one of, as you know, in one of the richest shellfish areas in the world. And so we're very underfunded.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Mr. Cox, you talked about invasive species, and we're neighbors. I'm from Minnesota, so we're now dealing with gypsy moss. We have, ash borer. We have pine beetle. And 5 times the amount DOI gives out in grants to others than to Indian country. I mean, we're all interconnected. These bugs don't know any boundaries. So what has been your conversation with the forestry folks when you're going in and talking to them about this? They just say, well, we're out of money. I mean, I don't want to. I got myself on the Agriculture Finance Committee, so if we're going to increase this, I need to know whether you'd be eligible if there's more of an increase, or if there's just a straight-up prohibition that they feel that they're confronted with, that they cannot support you in dealing with invasive species.
And that that's a trend that's ever increasing. So this invasive species threat in onslaught is one that every time we turn around, we add a number of species to the list of things that we're trying to combat. So each time we get an opportunity to speak about funding needs, we're talking about where we can particularly use that. In forestry, we believe that some of the BIA-funded programs that we're getting now, the BIA funding, can indeed work towards some of our invasive species needs right through the forest management dollars that are appropriated in BIA now, but we're also short there. So our total allocation that we're getting under TPA for forest management is short. So we need additional funding there just to start tackling some of those larger ones. And as I mentioned, the BIA Invasive Species Fund gives us one lump sum for the tribe to fight all our invasive species. So we're fighting invasive species not just in our forest, but in our waters and in our urban areas. And the forest for Menominee is one separate branch of management for the tribe. So there's all 3 of those aspects that we're trying to funnel money into, and it's just far, far too short. And we have made those asks.
Okay. Well, we're hoping the polar vortex knocks some of ours flat on their back, the invasive species, because we haven't had the cold winters like we've had in the past with that. So
for some of them, it's no joke. It is one of our tools that we can use to combat. But again, the polar vortex puts strain on our forestry staff as well in their own work to get out there and do what we need to manage that forest in a health sense in a sustainable sense that we do. So we need to manage all the effects that we're having placed before us and on us.
And are you dealing with oak wilt at all, or
We are.
You are that
We
as
are.
well?
We get a little bit of U.S. Forest Service dollars to do some forest health assessments and treatments, but again, it's added to the pot. So it's one piece of about 6 big invasives that we're battling on Menominee Forest now.
And and some of this oak wilt, and they're studying, and Asian ash borer, it's winter that you have to do the removal, and when you have winters like this, as you said, it's hard for the foresters to get out. Noticed you had, you've been involved in working on EPA as part of the Tribal Council. So if there's anything about the EPA you would like to add in written testimony or direct our staff to look into as concerns as well, we'd appreciate that. Sure. So I talked about the polar vortex, which means I'm prepared to talk about climate change. The fisheries are wholly, dependent upon temperature, water, nutrients in the water, and everything else. What's been going on as far as the shellfish with what you're seeing with stresses from climate change?
It has affected our shellfish, and what you'll see in the industry is that many of the reproduction, and even when we aid that in nurseries and stuff, that the shellfish larva is crashing, and it has to do with the economic or the climate change in the warm waters and the acidification of the Puget Sound. So we must, respond to that. And we're seeing it last year. Our fishermen who depend on that as an income to support their families, we were on the sidelines. We didn't fish for chum salmon, which is really the main species that our fishermen fish for. So it does affect us. And if I could respond a little bit more to your question earlier, is one of the problems that we see with the funding from the BIA, it is put into grants. And there is an incredible need, and more tribes are competing for those grants. And what we ask is that they increase the base level funding, because that's where the problem is. Every tribe is facing that, but yet when they get new money, they make us compete in a grant when that is not fulfilling that trust responsibility from the federal government.
I'm keeping a running total of the number of times we had the health care folks first. Grants are coming up, and this makes my 6th hash mark. So thank you for that. Thank you, gentlemen. So for the second panel, we can get started with testimony. Oh, there's the vote. So let's. Why don't I do this? I didn't do my prepared remarks in the beginning because I wanted to make sure that these gentlemen got through their testimony without being interrupted. So let me. I'll do that, and members can, if they don't want to hear my prepared opening remarks, I won't feel hurt if you go to leave to vote, but I'll be right behind you shortly. But this afternoon, we're going to be focusing on land, trust, and natural resource management, including climate change, and that's why I asked that specific question. This morning, we heard about the critical needs of Indian health, both on and off reservation. But I think this afternoon is particularly important because these issues are key components of Native culture and religion. And they're integral to the survival of individual Indians who rely on the resources and the subsistence as well as economic activity that we've started to hear about already. Indian country lacks the tax base enjoyed by other governments, so the funding provided by the federal government is essential to tribal economic development. But it's not only the federal government's actions that impact tribal lands, trust, and natural resources. Climate change is real, and it poses a serious threat to Indian country and Native peoples. Tribes are already struggling to protect their cultures and religion. Rising sea levels and increasing temperatures make this even harder. All of this requires the federal government to live up to its trust and treaty obligations to build tribes' resiliency for the future. And I look forward to hearing from the second panel and the remaining panels when we come back to vote this afternoon. And I I thank you all for being here, and with that, we're in recess until we're back after votes. Thank you.